Hi everybody, this is Lewis. So we're going to make 3 little videos here. This first one, I just want to look at the materials of what we're going to do with some yarn here and some knitting needles. This is what you should have picked up. So this, I wanted to talk about the materials. So the material we're using is just this yarn. You can get this was bought at Walmart, but you can get this at any craft store around. Yeah, this is a Lion brand yarn. This is called homespun. Sometimes it's also called thick and chunky because it is a thicker yarn. And if we took it apart, you would see that there are 4 different yarn threads that are kind of wrapped and woven together. Now, the only reason I point that out to you is as you're knitting, when you have a needle, you always want to try to loop through all of it. So you don't want the needle to go and pierce the yarn so that you separate it, because that will lead to just some kind of funky knitting as you go, yeah? So you'll figure that out, and you'll even make the mistake, and that's part of the learning process, is that we make the mistakes until we figure out how to kind of knit more perfectly, yeah? Now, I want to look at the yarn real quick. So, like I said, this is thick and quick yarn, but let's look at a couple other yarns because materials matter in the work we do and in art. So, let me show you. Here's 2 other kinds of yarn. And again, this is still a Lion brand yarn. This is the kind of yarn that most people think of when they think of yarn. This, what's called a worsted weight of the yarn. And you can see if I hold it up next to our thick and chunky yarn, it is a lot thinner. Now, surprisingly, there's still 4 threads that are wrapped together with that, yeah. Now, let's look at one other yarn here. This yarn, this purple yarn, this is called a lace weight yarn. So it is the thinnest of them. And this is a kind of perfect yarn if we were knitting socks, that we wanted something that was not a lot of fabric, but thin and much more lacy and flexible. Yeah. Now, even if we look at what these are made of, each of these are mostly acrylic, but there's a little bit of wool in them also. Yeah, so this Wool Ease yarn is called Wool Ease because there's 20% of wool and 80% of acrylic, which is kind of a man-made, human-made fabric. Yeah. Now, this yarn is actually more expensive because it is wool. Yeah, so this is 80% wool, this superwash, and then it is only 20%. I think part of it is nylon, which makes it a little bit springy, which is great for socks. And the other percent of it is acrylic, yeah, which gives it its really washableness. Yeah, with something that's pure wool, we have to be careful about washing it. And if we were making socks, you want something that you can wash. So that's a little lesson. Now, the only reason I point that out is because, like, if we were looking at a painting, an oil painting is very different than an acrylic painting, and it's very different than watercolor. So what we choose in terms of the materials affects what the product that we create is going to be. It also affects these 2. You can't tell from the video, but they feel very differently. Yeah, this feels kind of luxurious like a wool, and this is nice, but I can tell it's a human-made fabric. Yeah, so it does change the way you feel about it, and it also changes how much it costs to make it. So like I said, this is a really kind of nice, inexpensive yarn. Another thing about the thick yarns, the thick yarn knits up much quicker. So it's a perfect for someone who's beginning to start with something here, because if you started with a very thin yarn, it would take you a long time to make something. All right. Now, one other thing let's look at is just the needles. So the needles that I gave you are here, they're size 13 needles. Yeah, and this is 10 inches long. Yeah, and I can show you another pair of needles here. This needle, you can see, this is a size 4 needle, and it's 14 inches long. Now, what's the difference? A thinner needle is going to make a tighter fabric, so it'll have more loops on it, and the thicker needle will make a looser fabric. So most of the time when you begin, I like a thicker needle to teach a beginner because it's not as delicate and fine as these. And you can see here, I'm going to show you one other needle. This is a double pointed needle that's really thin. This is probably a size 1 needle, and it's got 2 sides. We use these when we make things like socks because you can link 3 of them together and then you can knit around in a circle. Yeah, that will make no sense to you, but it's just kind of information to know. But what's cool is just to see the different materials. And then I'll show you one other thing, and that'll end this video, is this is a little project here. And why I wanted to show it to you is just to show you because this has another type of needle. This is a circular knitting needle. So you can see that both of these knitting needles are connected together with this flexible wire. And if you look at this little blanket I'm knitting, you can see that it knits in a curve, and it ends up making this pattern here when I use 2 different colors of yarn. So as I make it, I reduce on this diagonal, which makes each of these curves a little less as I come down here, and then you see this pattern emerge. Yeah, this block is all solid pink. When I'm done with this block here, it will be solid red, and then the next one in the series is red and orange. But again, what we're looking at here is what's cool is that when artists decide to make something, they choose materials and they choose tools, and what you choose affects what's gonna happen in the process. So that's video 1 where we look at the materials. I'll get these out of the way. This is what you should have, is 1 ball and 2 knitting needles. On video 2, we'll cast on.